He's a tall, tall man.
What does it all mean?
This is where the archaeology has been found.
Oh, hi, how are you? Well, look at that.
I need a planter.
From the mountain top,
A shrine to a belly button.
This is a rock of salt?
he digs for clues in his dusty.
Look at that. No one gets into this place. No one.
Whoa, don't take me too far.
Now that's naked archaeology.
Wars archaeology, wars archaeology, wars archaeology.
This is the story of three men who, after the crucifixion of Jesus, fought a power struggle for the leadership of a movement that would one day become Christianity. This is the story of how that battle was won, how it took one of them to die to make up the mind of one of the others, and how, as usual, it all depended on a woman. That woman was Queen Helena, from a place called Adia Bene, on what is now the border of Iraq and Jordan. The first century historian Josephus records that she converted to Judaism around the time that Jesus was crucified. Josephus says that she moved to Jerusalem and she gave enormous funds to the Jewish temple. But one archaeologist thinks that story is only partially right. Robert Eisenman believes that Helena was not converted to Judaism, but to James's version of what would be called Christianity. His version entailed strict Jewish adherence to the law, yet open to Gentile followers.
I'm not talking to you as your brother now. Wasn't I chosen head of the zealots in this village?
Eisenman has put together pieces of an ancient puzzle to prove his theory. If he's right, it would change our understanding of how things played out in the years right after the crucifixion. First, the story of James.
I'm a patriot and a zealot.
Most people don't know much about James, but it's right there in the book of Acts. He was the Jesus-appointed leader of the movement after the crucifixion. And the big stars like Paul and Peter reported to James, not the other way around. Jesus' brother James was the boss. After the crucifixion, James stayed put in Jerusalem, remained true to Jewish law, and was a patron of the poor people of the city. Jerusalem at that time was under the boot of the Romans, and they were keeping a close eye on James.
We'll clean out this nest of vipers.
So if a rich queen was backing James, the Romans would have been plenty worried. But did it really happen? Archaeology has now revealed an amazing clue. We are in the city of David, beneath the Temple Mount, in the old city of Jerusalem. Recently, archaeologists uncovered the palace of the now obscure Queen Helena, built exactly where the poor people that followed James would have lived. It seems to back up Eisenman in his belief that Helena converted to James's brand of Judaism for Gentiles.
What you're looking at down here is an area where the palaces of Queen Helen, very sumptuous palace, and one of her sons named Monobasis and his descendants were living at the time of the uprising against Rome.
In a way, by situating her palace in the poor area, she's saying, I don't want to be with the rich people who are sucking up to the Roman occupation.
No, absolutely. These are the freedom fighters. This is the bastion and center of the war against Rome, and right in the center of it is the Helen family.
And the conflict itself, how can it be defined?
Think of it like the US and the USSR in the Cold War. In the first century, Helena's country, Adia Bene, was a buffer between Rome and Parthia. Two superpowers divided right on the border that Queen Helena controlled. And here she is, living with the poor in Jerusalem. And Eisenman believes, following the religious teachings of Jesus' brother. But what's his proof?
Is it true?
Eisenman has juxtaposed the Book of Acts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and historical texts to build his case, and for Eisenman, they all spell James. Let's start with the Book of Acts. Acts 15 and 16 are associated with James. Here he speaks to non-Jews, or Gentiles and tells them that they do not have to be circumcised or follow kosher law.
It must be true. I saw it in this book right here.
Well, Josephus records that Helena's sons were not circumcised. Possible evidence that Queen Helena's family did not convert to Judaism, but to James's version of Christianity for Gentiles. Then, Eisenman found a letter in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The scrolls were discovered in 1948 in caves along the Dead Sea. They include some of the oldest biblical texts ever found. One fragment, called MMT by scholars, contain ideas and words associated with James in the Book of Acts. But in the scrolls, it's a letter written to a king by an anonymous writer. Eisenman believes that writer was James.
The minute I saw it, I was smacked right in the middle of the eyes by the fact that MMT contained themes of materials associated with James in the Book of Acts. And
A letter by James.
right, but it talks about the good of your own good and the good of your people, as if this is a foreign king.
So you're saying this is a letter to a king.
Right,
That king is the king of Edessa.
right.
And this is the final piece of Eisenman's puzzle. Edessa was right next door to Queen Helena's Adiabene. And the king of Edessa's favorite queen was, you guessed it, Queen Helena. While Helena may be an obscure figure, the king of Edessa's story is well known. Because as it turns out, there is an ancient Christian tradition that he is the first king to convert to Christianity. According to this tradition, the king of Edessa wrote a letter to Jesus, asking Jesus to heal him of an illness. Jesus responded that he would send one of his apostles after his death and resurrection. The king of Edessa was healed and converted. Was it James who did the miraculous healing?
He's well learned in the law.
Eisenman's pieces seem to fit. It seems like the same story is being told by the Archaeology, the Book of Acts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Josephus. For Eisenman, although James stayed true to Jewish law, he was a world player, a converter of kings and queens. Eisenman says that when she moved to Jerusalem, Queen Helena pitched her tents among James's followers.
If we could zap back through time and walk those passages behind you and meet those people,
Right.
you think if we asked them, who was your leader? A lot of them you think would say,
James the righteous one.
If Queen Helena and her husband had converted to James's Jesus movement for Gentiles, a new picture of James emerges. He wasn't some bit player. He was Rome's public enemy #1, the leader of the Jesus movement, and the converter of strategic kingdoms. This sets the stage for the conflict with two other key players, Paul and Peter. This conflict would determine whether the followers of Jesus were to remain a Jerusalem-based Jewish sect with some Gentile followers or a mighty Rome-based religion.
He's a tall, tall man. He's a tall, tall man.
We've now heard a pretty convincing case that James, the brother of Jesus, was running the show from his tiny base in Jerusalem. And he wasn't selling falafel. What he was doing is converting kings and queens. In fact, some historians now believe that James's rising power was a threat to the #2 guy in the Jesus movement, Paul.
He was born Saul in 5 or 10 CE in what is present-day Turkey. He was a Roman citizen, but Jewish educated. He was actually a persecutor of the early Jesus followers, until he set off on the road to Damascus, where a resurrected Jesus appeared to him. He commanded Saul to lead the world in a brand new religion that would one day become Christianity. Saul changed his name to Paul and began converting thousands. Today, he is considered to be the guy who brought Christianity to the Western world. How did he do it?
He says in 1 Corinthians, I run the race to win. That's how I fight, not beating the air. I'll be a Greek to the Greek, a Jew to the Jew, a Torah keeper to the Torah keeper, a Torah breaker to the Torah breaker. I'll do whatever I have to do to win. In other words, it's the old philosophy of American football. Win, baby, just win. Winning is the only thing.
If winning was the only thing for Paul, some experts believe Paul may have even turned to the other side in his obsession to beat James. Military historian Rosemary Sheldon thinks Paul was a spy sent by the Romans to infiltrate the Jesus movement. And she's created a spy checklist to prove it.
Watch what he does. You see his actions, not necessarily his words. See who he associates with. Paul is always surrounded by Roman officers, Roman governors, people of wealth. A spy has to take on many identities, not just a change of a name, but it could be the change of your appearance. You have to be able to move between one milieu and the next. Those are good skills to have if you're in the intelligence business.
Paul did have different aliases. He did flip from enemy to friend of Jesus' followers, and his version of Jesus' message turned Christianity from an anti to a pro-Roman movement. If James was converting kingdoms to his revolutionary brand of Christianity, that would have been reason enough for the Romans to send a double agent to infiltrate Jesus' followers and pacify the movement. Paul first surfaces as an apostle, as opposed to a persecutor, in Antioch, in modern-day Turkey, where tradition holds that the first Christians were worshiping in these caves. I'm here with scholar of religion, Barry Wilson.
People don't realize, when we were sitting here in a cave where Paul may have worshipped.
Paul may very well have worshipped here along with many other people. Peter, Barnabas, Titus, and a whole host of other people.
They might have sat exactly where we sit.
Right here.
Here, Peter and Paul had a big blow-up. The issues they fought about are hard for a modern-day Christian to understand. Basically, they were arguing whether the followers of Jesus, including the original Jews, should circumcise or not, eat kosher or not. And Paul was talking about throwing away the rule book. It's a curious act that raises suspicion about which side Paul was on.
People tend to blend Paul in with the rest of early Christianity. And that's a fundamental mistake. The origin of Paul's religion is different. It's in a vision, not the historical Jesus. His beliefs are different. They are focused upon the dying, rising Christ. And his practices are different. He stands outside of Judaism by advocating not following the Jewish law. And that's significant. These are so significant differences that Paul really created a new religion. It is separate from the religion that Jesus taught, practiced, and encouraged.
And here at Antioch, Peter's watching all this, trying to decide who to side with, James or Paul. All the while, it seems that he, too, was a spy. Except he wasn't working for the Romans, he was reporting to the rabbis.
He's a tall, tall man. He's a tall, tall man.
We know that James represented the Orthodox Jewish Jesus movement. Paul, well, he represented the Gentile version, going easy on Jewish law. And then there's Peter. At first, he seems to be sticking to James and the Jews. Next thing you know, he's eating non-kosher food with non-Jews.
Even Paul, who's converting non-Jews, tears into Peter for that one. Why the flip-flop? Wasn't Peter the rock upon which Jesus built his church? Isn't the Vatican built over his grave? Let's recall what the Christian Gospels tell us. Peter was a fisherman named Simon who met Jesus at the Sea of Galilee, a man who Jesus nicknamed Peter, meaning rocky in Greek.
And on this rock I will build my church.
Jesus also correctly predicted that Peter would deny him 3 times before the crucifixion. How could he be the rock on the one hand and deny the Christ on the other?
I can't explain it even to myself.
Maybe Peter was a waffler, a kind of rocky waffler. But some historians think there may have been a deeper reason for Peter's indecisiveness. Some think that Peter was sent by the Jewish religious leaders to keep Paul very far away from Jews.
That's it.
That's it.
They were afraid that by getting Jews to dump the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, Paul would spell big trouble for Judaism. So they sent Peter into Paul's ranks to make sure that Christianity and Judaism broke once and for all. This controversial theory comes from a book called the Toldot Yeshu. It first surfaced in the 6th century, and some scholars think that it may have been based on the lost gospel of the Hebrews. In it, Peter pretends to be a Jesus follower to protect Judaism. It's a radical idea. I'm meeting historian Israel Yuval from the Hebrew University.
The story itself tells about a decision made by the Jewish scholars to ask Peter to become a kind of double agent, to accept Christianity, to become a follower of Jesus, and to change Christianity from inside. What disturbed them was the threat from inside, the possibility that there could be a Jewish sect which follows Jesus. And now, by being a double agent, Peter turned Christianity to be a non-Jewish religion, and that's why the rabbinic counterversion regarded him so positively.
But if everyone at the time knew that Peter was a kosher-eating Jew, how does the New Testament explain his transition into a bacon-eating ally of Paul? Well, like Paul, Peter seems to have had a revelation. In the book of Acts, Peter is told that all food is kosher, and all people who fear God, including the hated Romans, are also kosher. So Peter ends up eating bacon and eggs with the oppressors of his people. Did Peter really have this vision, or was this the cover story of a double agent? And here's another shocker. According to Jewish tradition, as Peter left his beloved Judaism to join Paul's movement, he composed one last prayer, which is still being said in every synagogue on every Sabbath. It's called the Nishmat Kol Chai. It's addressed to the God of Israel, and it includes the following line: "There is no God but you." Few Jews know that it may have been penned by the first pope.
So the plot thickens. James holds the fort in a Jewish-based Jesus camp. And then there's Peter. He was waiting to see who's going to be the winner, James or Paul. He was comfortable with James, not so comfortable with Paul. And as long as James was in charge, he was going along for the ride. And then there's Paul. He's on the road, working the Gentiles.
Then, the dramatic turn. In 62 AD, James is clubbed, stoned, and dragged to his death on the orders of a Jewish high priest working for the Romans. Incredibly, the murder of James, brother of Jesus, does not even receive a mention in the New Testament. We know the story from the historian Josephus. Why is his martyrdom covered up? The answer to that question reveals a new layer in the spy-counter-spy story of the birth of Christianity.
He's a tall, tall man. He's a tall, tall man.
Quick quiz. The book of Acts is supposedly the history of the early followers of Jesus. How many references to Paul? 150. How many to Peter? 55. And how many to the brother of Jesus, James? 3.
Now, the weird thing is the book of Acts. The book of Acts is a book of Christian history, right? But it misses the most important events in early church history. It misses the election of James.
So Acts is writing James out of history.
Right, and the end of Acts, guess where Acts ends? 62 AD, with Paul under loose house arrest in Rome, free to come and go however he pleases. Acts doesn't even tell us how he dies. Yet, James's stoning in 62 AD, that is covered in Josephus for us, is left out of Acts. Now, how can you understand that? Why would Acts miss the election of and the death of the most important character in early Christianity?
James lost, Paul won. But there's an interesting archaeological epilogue to the story. I'm in Rome, at the cathedral which tradition holds as the final resting place of Paul.
We are in the basilica called St. Paul outside the walls. Actually, this is the second important basilica built in the city of Rome, and it was constructed on the top of St. Paul's tomb. In fact, St. Paul's tomb is still under the main altar of this basilica.
According to tradition, Paul was beheaded by the Romans around 64 AD, or maybe he was never killed at all, and he was just retired by his Roman handlers. In 370 AD, the first church was erected here in his memory. But for years, people doubted that Paul was actually buried here. Then in 2006, the Vatican announced that it had found a marble sarcophagus under the church. The sarcophagus is not available for public viewing, and most pilgrims pray here, assuming that it is right beneath the altar in front of them. But it's not. It's tucked away on the other side of the altar. Here, the naked archaeologist got exclusive access. And sure enough, there is a sarcophagus here. When I stuck the camera into the crevice, we could clearly read the Latin equivalent of Paul, Apostle, and Martyr.
It says Apostle and Martyr.
I think that was amazing. I mean, did anybody ever get that before? No?
Simcha, you're incredible, Simcha.
What? Nobody got it?
No, because it's very unusual.
It feels great. Got a scoop. That's wonderful.
So Paul, he got his marble sarcophagus and the whole cathedral. Peter, well, he got the whole Vatican. As for James, he got nothing. He's all but forgotten. It all seems like Shakespearean court intrigue, too incredible to be true, except for some compelling evidence buried under 2,000 years of theological spin.
He's a tall, tall man.